Angela Ferris didn't know why the captain had assigned her to the one post no guard wanted. The Alpha King's bedchamber door, third floor, east corridor, midnight watch. Alone. She'd heard the rumors on her way up the stairs. The last guard who took this post had requested a transfer within 2 nights. The one before that had simply stopped showing up. No one said why. No one needed to. The East Corridor had a reputation, and Angela had learned in her first week at Cordale Fortress that reputations mattered more than facts. The corridor stretched long and narrow ahead of her, stone walls lit by iron sconces that threw uneven pools of gold against the rock. Her boots were silent on the flagstones as she approached the door. It was massive. Dark oak banded with bronze, heavy enough that it would take 2 hands and her full weight to open. A wolf's head had been carved into the center of the wood, its jaws parted, its eyes worn smooth by decades of hands pressing against it. She took her position to the left of the frame, shoulders back, hand resting on the hilt of the short blade at her belt. The leather vest creaked softly as she settled her weight. This was a punishment. She knew it the way she knew her own name. Captain Neville Stanton had made that clear without saying a single word, his green eyes flat and amused when he'd read out the assignment that morning, his voice pitched just loud enough for the other guards to hear. Ferris, bedchamber door, midnight to dawn. The silence that followed had been worse than laughter. A few of the men exchanged glances. One of them, a broad-shouldered veteran named Piers, had looked at her with something close to sympathy before turning away. She'd said nothing. She never did. That was the only currency she had left in this place. Silence and the refusal to break. The first hour passed without incident. Angela stood motionless, listening to the fortress breathe around her. Stone settling. Wind threading through the arrow slits 2 floors below. The distant, muffled sound of the watch change at the main gate, voices too far away to distinguish. Above it all, the slow drip of water somewhere deep in the walls, steady as a heartbeat. She didn't know what was on the other side of the door. She hadn't been told whether the king was inside or elsewhere in the fortress. Her orders were simple. Stand, watch. Let no one pass. Halfway through the second hour, something changed. It started as a feeling, not a sound. A stillness that crept outward from the door like fog rolling off the mountain. The torches in their sconces stopped flickering. The constant tiny drafts that moved through every corridor in the fortress went quiet. Even the water stopped dripping. Angela's breath slowed without her permission. Her pulse, which had been steady and unremarkable, dropped to something deep and even, as though her body had decided on its own to become part of the silence. She blinked, swallowed, shifted her weight from one foot to the other. The stillness didn't break. It settled around her like a hand pressed gently to the center of her chest, holding her in place. Not threatening, not painful. Just there, enormous and calm, the way a lake is calm before sunrise. Her fingers tightened on the hilt of her blade. She didn't understand it, but she understood this. Whatever was behind that door was awake, and it knew she was here. The second night was worse. Angela arrived at her post 10 minutes early, her braid freshly tied, her vest buckled tight. She'd spent the hours before her shift-running drills in the lower yard, pushing herself through footwork patterns until her legs burned, trying to exhaust whatever restless energy had kept her awake through the day. It hadn't worked. She'd lain in her bunk in the guards' barracks staring at the ceiling, replaying the way the corridor had gone still, the way her heartbeat had slowed, the way every hair on her arms had lifted and then, strangely, settled, as though whatever force had touched her had decided she wasn't a threat. She took her position, left of the frame, hand on the hilt, shoulders back. The stillness came faster this time. Within minutes, the torches steadied. The drafts died, and that deep, pressing calm rolled through her like a tide going out. Her breathing matched it before she could stop herself. Then the door opened. Not all the way. Just enough for lamplight to spill in a wedge across the flagstones, and a voice to reach her, low and unhurried. "You didn't flinch last night." Angela stared straight ahead at the opposite wall. Protocol required her to acknowledge a superior, but not to turn from her post unless given a direct order. "No, Your Majesty." A pause. She could feel him in the gap, the way you feel heat from a hearth before you see the fire. The stillness intensified until the air felt thick enough to lean against. Every guard before you flinched. Most of them left. "I was assigned to this post," she said. "I don't leave posts." Another pause. Longer this time. Then quietly, almost to himself. "No, I don't think you do." The door closed. The stillness lingered for another 30 seconds, maybe a minute, holding her in that strange, suspended calm. Then it released, and the torches guttered, and the drafts returned, and Angela let out a breath she hadn't realized she'd been holding. Her hands were shaking. She learned his habits by the 4th night. He read late. She could hear the turning of pages through the heavy wood, soft as moth wings. Occasionally he paced, and his footsteps were measured and even, the stride of someone thinking rather than restless. He kept the fire high. The wood at the base of the door was always warm when she pressed her palm flat against it during the coldest hours before dawn. She did not speak to him again. He did not open the door, but the stillness came every night. And every night it came faster, as if it recognized her now. As if it had been waiting for her since the last time she'd left. On the 5th night, Piers found her during the meal before her shift. He was older than most of the garrison, his face lined and weather-beaten, his hair more gray than brown. He sat down across from her without asking, set his bowl on the table, and didn't speak for a full minute. "You're still at the door," he said finally. "I am. Stanton expected you to quit by now." Piers tore a piece of bread in half and chewed thoughtfully. "That's why he put you there. Wanted to see you break." "I know. The king's quarters do something to people. The ones who can't handle it say the air goes wrong, like being underwater." Angela looked at him. He met her gaze steadily, his brown eyes calm and direct. "It doesn't go wrong," she said. "It goes still." Something shifted in his expression. Not surprise, exactly. Recognition. "You feel it differently." "I don't know what I feel." Piers studied her for a long moment, then nodded once and returned to his bread. He didn't bring it up again. On the 6th night, something happened that she couldn't explain to anyone. She was standing at her post. The stillness settled around her like a second cloak when she felt something through the door. Not sound, not movement. A feeling, specific and unmistakable, that pressed against the inside of her ribs and made her breath hitch. Loneliness. Not hers. His. It came through the wood and the iron and the stone like heat through glass, and it was enormous. The kind of loneliness that doesn't come from being alone, but from being surrounded by people who only see the title and never the man underneath. Angela turned her head toward the door. She pressed her palm flat against the oak, and the wood was warm beneath her fingers, and the wolf's head carving was smooth under her thumb. She didn't speak, but she pressed harder, as if the pressure alone could say what she couldn't. On the other side, she heard footsteps stop. A long pause. Then the faintest sound, a palm pressing against the other side of the door, directly opposite hers. They stood like that for a long time, the oak between them and the stillness holding them both. On the 7th night, Stanton came to inspect. He arrived an hour past midnight, his boots deliberately loud on the stone, his bronze captain's brooch catching the torchlight. Angela saw him from the end of the corridor and felt the stillness around her waver, like a surface of water disturbed by a thrown stone. Still here, Ferris. He stopped 3 paces away, thumbs hooked in his belt, his green eyes moving over her with undisguised contempt. I'm surprised. You assigned me to this post, Captain. I did. He took a step closer. Because every other guard who stood here proved what I already knew. That whatever sits behind that door is more than rank and file can stomach. He tilted his head. But you're not quite rank and file, are you? Angela said nothing. I know who you were before you showed up at my garrison with forged soot on your hands and a fake name that didn't last 2 days. His voice dropped. The Ferris family. Minor nobility from the Eastern Ridge. Disgraced when your father's debts came due and he couldn't pay. Stripped of title. Stripped of land. And their only daughter, who once had tutors and riding masters, joins the King's Guard like a common conscript. The words landed exactly where he intended them to. Angela felt them settle against her ribs like stones. Is there a question, Captain? Here's what I think. He stepped closer still, close enough that she could smell the leather of his jerkin and the sharp bite of the oil he used on his blades. I think you took this post because you have something to prove. And I think you'll stand here until your legs give out before you admit that you can't handle it. Because admitting that would mean the captain who never wanted you in his garrison was right. He smiled. It didn't reach his eyes. But the thing is, Ferris, I am right. You don't belong here. Not in my guard and not at that door. Behind her, the stillness swelled. It pressed outward from the wood like a held breath, and Angela felt it move through her, steadying her pulse, quieting the tremor in her hands. She looked at Stanton. My shift ends at dawn, Captain. If you have orders, I'll follow them. If you don't, I'd appreciate being left to my post. His smile faded. He held her gaze for a beat too long, then turned on his heel and walked back down the corridor without another word. Angela waited until his footsteps faded completely before she let herself exhale. The stillness gentled around her, settling back into that deep calm, and she pressed her shoulders against the stone wall and closed her eyes for just a moment. When she opened them, the base of the door was glowing faintly with firelight from within, and she could have sworn she heard, just barely, the sound of someone standing very close to the other side. Things accelerated after that. The next evening, she was summoned to the great hall before her shift. A page found her in the armory, delivered the message with wide eyes, and then fled as though he'd been sent to wake a sleeping wolf. The great hall was nearly empty. A few advisors clustered near the hearth, speaking in low voices. Banners hung from the vaulted ceiling, deep blue and bronze, and the long tables had been cleared except for a single chair at the far end of the raised platform. He was sitting in it. She'd seen the Alpha King only twice before, both times from a distance, both times in passing. He was tall, broad through the shoulders, with dark brown hair kept short on the sides and longer on top, and the kind of face that looked carved rather than born. He wore a black wool long coat with bronze wolf clasps at the collar over a slate blue shirt, and the bronze circlet on his brow caught the firelight in a thin, steady line. But his eyes were what stopped her. Amber. Not gold, not brown. Amber, warm and clear, the color of pine resin held up to the sun. Angela crossed the hall and dropped to one knee at the base of the platform. The stone was cold through the wool of her trousers. Stand up. His voice was the same one she'd heard through the door. Low, unhurried, but here, without the oak between them, it moved through her differently. She felt it in her sternum, a vibration that spread outward and made the stillness rise so fast she nearly swayed. She stood, met his gaze, held it. The amber eyes studied her, and she had the disconcerting sense that he was seeing more than her face, more than her uniform. That he was reading something in the air between them, some invisible script she couldn't decipher. "You've been at my door for 7 nights," he said. "Yes, Your Majesty." "And you haven't asked to leave?" "No." He leaned forward slightly, forearms on his knees. The wolf clasps at his collar gleamed. Why not? Because she was stubborn. Because Stanton wanted her to fail. Because her family had already lost everything, and she refused to lose one more thing, even a post no one else wanted. All of those answers were true. None of them were the whole truth. Because when I stand there, she said carefully, something happens that I don't understand. And I'd rather stand with what I don't understand than run from it. The silence that followed was not the fortress's silence. It was his. A deliberate, weighted quiet that pressed against her skin the way the stillness pressed against her through the door. Your captain doesn't want you in the guard. My captain has made that clear. He told me you're a liability, insubordinate, unreliable. A pause. He recommended your dismissal this morning. Something cold slid through her chest. She kept her face steady. And what did you say, Your Majesty? The corner of his mouth moved. Not quite a smile. Something closer to recognition. I said no. He stood. He was taller than she'd expected, and the long coat fell around him like armor, and the way he moved down the 3 steps from the platform was controlled and deliberate. Each step placed with the precision of someone who was always aware of exactly how much space he occupied. He stopped 2 paces from her, close enough that the stillness between them collapsed into something immediate and dense, and Angela felt her breath catch, felt her pulse slow to match a rhythm she couldn't hear but could feel, deep in her chest, steady as the tide. You'll remain at your post, he said quietly. That's not a request. Understood. He looked at her for a moment longer, those amber eyes holding something she couldn't name, something that looked almost like relief. Then he turned and walked toward the far door, and the stillness went with him, leaving her standing alone in the great hall with the banners swaying overhead, and her heart beating at a pace that wasn't quite her own. She learned his name that night. Not the title. The name. It was the 3rd hour of her shift, the corridor colder than usual, wind finding its way through a crack in the mortar somewhere above. She'd been standing motionless for so long that frost had started to form on the bronze buckles of her vest. The door opened, wider this time, wide enough that she could see the edge of the room beyond, a heavy oak table stacked with papers, a fire burning low in a stone hearth, the corner of a dark fur thrown over the back of a chair. He stood in the doorway in his shirt sleeves, the long coat gone, the circlet gone. Without them, he looked younger. The firelight caught the angles of his face and softened them, and his hair was slightly disordered, as though he'd been running his hands through it. It's cold tonight, he said. Yes. You've been out here for 3 hours. Yes. He looked at her. The stillness wrapped around them both like a held breath, and in it, she could feel something she hadn't felt before. Not calm, something warmer, something that pulsed at the edges like a heartbeat trying to sync with hers. My name is Chet, he said. You should know that. She blinked. Royal protocol didn't cover this. None of her training covered this. Angela, she said, before she could think about whether she should. He nodded, as though she'd confirmed something he already knew. Angela. The way he said it was careful, like he was testing the weight of it. Are you warm enough? I'm fine. You're not. Your hands are shaking. She looked down. They were. She curled them into fists at her sides. I can endure it. I know you can. His voice softened. That's not what I asked. The silence between them stretched. Inside the room, the fire popped and settled. Outside, wind moved against the stone, and somewhere far below, a door opened and closed. I'll have a brazier sent up, he said. Tomorrow night. You don't need to do that. I know. He held her gaze. I'm going to anyway. He stepped back. The door began to close, and just before it sealed, he paused. Good night, Angela. Her name and his voice did something to the stillness between them. It tightened, like a rope pulled taut, and for one breath, she felt it everywhere, in her fingertips, in the backs of her knees, in the hollow of her throat. Good night, she managed. The door closed. The warmth lingered. The brazier appeared the next evening, set into a shallow alcove in the wall beside the door. Bronze, well-made, already glowing with fresh coals. No one seemed to know who had ordered it. Angela didn't ask. She stood through her shift with the warmth at her side and the stillness against her back, and when the door opened at the second hour, she didn't startle. They talked. Not about anything that mattered at first. He asked about her training. She asked about the fortress, its history, why the corridors were built so narrow. He told her that Cordale had been designed for defense, not comfort, that every hallway was a choke point and every door a barrier. Even yours? She asked, and the question came out softer than she intended. Especially mine. The conversations grew longer as the nights passed. He never asked her to come in. He stood in the doorway or leaned against the frame, and she stood at her post, and the distance between them was 3 feet of stone floor that neither of them crossed. But the stillness changed. It deepened. It began to feel less like a phenomenon and more like a language, something being communicated in a register below hearing. On the 9th night, he asked her about the eastern ridge. She hadn't expected to answer. The ridge was the life before, the one she'd severed cleanly and deliberately, and she'd trained herself not to think about it the way she'd trained herself to stand for hours without shifting weight. But his voice was quiet, and the corridor was dark, and the fire behind him painted his face in soft gold, and somehow the words came anyway. She told him about the house on the slope where the wind never stopped, about the library that smelled of leather and dust, and the courtyard where she'd learned to ride before she could read. About the morning the magistrate's men came with the writs and the locks and the sealed documents, and how her father's hands had shaken so badly he couldn't sign his own name. She told him about walking down the ridge road with a single bag on her shoulder, turning once to look back, and seeing the windows already dark. When she finished, the stillness around them had gone so dense and soft that she could barely hear the fire behind him. His hand was gripping the doorframe, knuckles white. "You lost everything," he said. "I lost things. Not everything." She paused. "Everything would mean losing myself. I haven't done that yet." He was quiet for a long time. When he spoke again, his voice had a roughness to it that she hadn't heard before. He told her things in return, that the crown was heavier than anyone knew, that he'd taken it young and without preparation, thrust into it when his father had fallen ill and the court had needed someone to stand in the gap, that most nights he couldn't sleep, and the pacing she'd heard through the door was him walking the perimeter of his room like an animal in a cage, trying to exhaust himself into rest. He told her that the fortress had 100 rooms and he felt at home in none of them, that the advisors spoke to the title, not the man, and that he'd started to wonder if there was still a man underneath it, or just the title all the way down. "There is," Angela said. "I can hear him." His breath caught. She heard it clearly, the way she heard everything now, every shift of his weight, every inhale, every micro-hesitation before he spoke. The stillness made her aware of him the way she was aware of her own pulse. "That's why you heard me," he said one night, his voice rough at the edges. "Every other guard heard a threat. You just heard someone who couldn't sleep." She didn't answer right away. The stillness held them both, and in it she could feel his exhaustion like a texture against her skin, heavy and worn. "I heard you," she said simply. His eyes found hers in the torchlight, and the amber in them burned. It broke on the 12th night. Stanton came again. This time he wasn't alone. 2 guards flanked him, men Angela recognized from the morning drills, men who followed orders without asking questions. Ferris. His voice rang off the stone. Step away from the door. Angela held her position. On whose authority? Mine. You're being reassigned. He held up a folded paper. Effective immediately. Report to the south gate. The king assigned me to this post directly. And I'm his captain of the guard. Stanton's voice hardened. Which means his assignments go through me. Step away, Ferris. Don't make this harder than it needs to be. The two guards shifted. Not aggressive. Not yet. But ready. Angela felt the stillness surge behind her, pressing against the door like something alive. She could feel Chet on the other side, awake, alert. Whether he'd heard the voices or felt the disturbance through whatever connected them, she didn't know. But he was there. She could step away. Take the reassignment. Prove Stanton right. Prove every whisper in the barracks right. That the disgraced noble's daughter didn't belong here and never had. Or... Angela straightened to her full height. Her hand dropped from her blade. She didn't need it. No. Stanton's expression flickered. Excuse me? I said no. Her voice was steady. She felt the stillness at her back like a wall, immovable and sure. You didn't assign me to this door because the post needed filling. You assigned me here because you wanted me to fail. Every guard who stood here before me left because they felt something they couldn't explain, and you knew that, and you thought I'd be the same. She took a step toward him. The two guards shifted again, uncertain. But I'm not the same. And you know that too, Captain. That's why you're here with 2 men at midnight instead of waiting for me to come to you. Because I didn't break. Because I won't. Stanton's jaw tightened. His hand moved to his belt. You're refusing a direct order. I'm refusing an unlawful one. The king told me to remain at this post. If you want me moved, bring me his word in his voice, to my face. Until then, I stand here. The corridor went absolutely silent. The torches froze. The drafts died. The stillness expanded outward from the door until it filled every inch of the narrow hallway, and the two guards behind Stanton went pale and took a step back. Stanton felt it too. She could see it in the way his pupils tightened and his breathing changed, could see the recognition in his face, the sudden understanding that whatever lived behind that door was listening. Behind Angela, the lock turned. She didn't move. She kept her eyes on Stanton as the door swung open and the warmth of the fire and the weight of a presence far larger than any title spilled into the corridor. Chet's voice came from directly behind her, and it was not the quiet, careful voice she'd heard through the doorway on cold nights. It was low and absolute, the kind of voice that didn't need volume because it carried weight instead. Captain Stanton. Stanton's throat moved as he swallowed. Your Majesty, you're standing in my corridor, at my door, with armed men attempting to remove a guard I personally stationed here. A pause that felt like a blade being drawn. Explain. The guard is... she's... Stanton faltered. Angela had never heard him falter. She's not suited for this post, Your Majesty. She's the only guard who's ever been suited for this post. Chet stepped forward, and Angela felt him beside her now, his shoulder nearly touching hers, the stillness between them not separate anymore, but shared. And you know that, which is exactly why you want her gone. Stanton's eyes moved to Angela, then back to the king. The calculation behind them was visible, the rapid assessment of a man realizing he'd miscounted his cards. You're relieved of command for the night, Captain. Report to the council hall at first light. We'll discuss your conduct in full, with witnesses. Stanton stood motionless for a long moment. Then he gave a curt nod, turned, and walked back down the corridor. The two guards followed. None of them looked back. The silence after they left was enormous. Angela became aware of several things at once, that her hands were shaking again, that her breath was coming too fast, that Chet was standing close enough that she could feel the heat of his arm through the wool of her sleeve. She turned to face him. He was looking at her the way he had in the great hall, with that expression she couldn't name. But now, standing this close, she could see what it was. Not relief, not gratitude. Recognition. The absolute bone-deep recognition of someone seeing something they'd been searching for without knowing they'd been searching. "You should have called for me sooner," he said. "I didn't need to call for you." "I know." His voice cracked slightly on the word. "That's what terrifies me." The stillness between them was so complete that she could hear his heartbeat. Or hers. She couldn't tell anymore. He lifted his hand, slowly giving her time to step back, to refuse, to remember that she was a guard and he was a king, and the distance between those things was supposed to be uncrossable. She didn't step back. His fingers touched her jaw. Light. Warm. Trembling slightly, and that was the thing that undid her, that the Alpha King's hand trembled when he touched her face. "Come inside," he said. 2 words, the same ones from the title of every rumor, every whispered story about the door no guard could stomach. But he said them like a question, like a prayer, like something he'd been holding behind his teeth for 12 nights, waiting until he was certain she wouldn't mistake it for a command. Angela looked at the door behind him. Open, firelit, warm. She looked at him. Amber eyes, trembling hand, a king who paced his room at night because he couldn't sleep, who sent braziers without being asked, who said her name like it was the only word he'd learned that mattered. She crossed the threshold. The room was smaller than she'd expected. Stone walls softened by heavy tapestries in blue and bronze, a fire burning high in the hearth, a table covered in papers, a narrow bed with a dark fur thrown across it. A window cut into the far wall showed the mountains, black against a sky full of stars. She stood just inside the door, and the stillness that had pressed against her from outside was different in here. Warmer, closer, like standing inside a heartbeat. Chet closed the door behind them. He didn't lock it. He leaned against it, the wood at his back, his arms at his sides, and looked at her. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. The fire crackled. The wind pressed against the window. Angela's eyes moved over the room, taking in the details she'd spent 12 nights imagining. The books stacked on the floor beside the bed, the half-finished letter on the desk, the ink not yet dry. A pair of boots set neatly by the hearth, their leather worn soft with use. This was where he paced. This was where he couldn't sleep. These walls, this floor, this fire. "I felt you," he said quietly, "the first night, before you'd even reached the corridor. Something in me went still, and I knew someone was coming who was different." Angela pressed her palms together to stop them trembling. "I felt it too. I thought it was the fortress." "It's not the fortress." "I know." The fire shifted. Sparks climbed. The room smelled of burning oak and old stone and something else, something warm and specific that she was beginning to associate with him. Clean wool. Ink. The faint mineral sharpness of the bronze he wore against his skin. "Stanton put me at your door to get rid of me," she said. "Yes." "And you let him." "I requested it." Chet's jaw tightened. "I told the captain I wanted a new guard, someone I hadn't met. He chose the one he most wanted gone, which is exactly what I expected him to do." A pause. "I needed to know who it was. The pull. Whatever it is that's been keeping me awake, making me pace, making the air go wrong whenever someone new comes near that door, and it isn't. It isn't." He stopped, swallowed. "It wasn't the guards who couldn't handle the post," Angela said slowly, understanding breaking open in her chest. "It was you. They felt your restlessness through the door. Your searching. Yes. And when I came, it stopped. Yes." His voice was barely audible. "Everything stopped." She thought about the first night, the way the torches had steadied, the way her pulse had slowed, the way the fortress itself seemed to exhale as though something that had been holding its breath for years had finally found what it was waiting for. "How long?" she asked. "How long what? How long were you searching? Before me?" He looked away. The fire caught the edge of his jaw and threw it into sharp relief. "Since I took the crown. 3 years. Every night. Pacing. Every new guard. Feeling the door and knowing it wasn't right. Knowing someone was supposed to be standing on the other side and not knowing who. 3 years. Angela felt the weight of that settle over her. 3 years of sleepless nights and revolving guards and a stillness that frightened everyone it touched because they couldn't hear what it was asking. "You could have told someone," she said. "I'm the king." His mouth twisted. "Kings don't tell people they can't sleep because the air feels wrong." Angela took a step toward him. Then another. The stillness between them compressed until it was a single shared space. Their breathing synced, their pulses matched, the distance between guard and king reduced to a hand's breadth that felt like the most important boundary in the world. "I'm a disgraced noble's daughter," she said. "I have nothing. No title, no name worth keeping, no rank beyond what I've earned in your garrison. If I step any closer, every person who's ever said I don't belong here will have proof." Chet reached for her. Both hands this time, settling on her shoulders, his thumbs brushing the collar of her tunic, where the bronze buckles met the leather. "You belong here," he said. "You belong here because the moment you stood outside that door, every restless thing in me finally went quiet. Not because of your name or your title or anything you've lost, because you heard me pacing and didn't run. Because you stood in the cold for 12 nights and never once complained. Because when a man with authority tried to move you, you looked him in the eye and said no." His forehead touched hers. The bronze circlet was gone, left somewhere inside the room, and his skin was warm against hers, and the stillness wrapped around them both and held. "I'm going to kiss you," he said. "And if you'd rather I didn't, say so now, because I'll stop. But I need you to know that this is not a command. This is not a king asking. This is just me." Angela's hands came up and gripped the front of his shirt. "Then just you should stop talking," she said. He kissed her. It was slow and deliberate, and his hands moved from her shoulders to the sides of her face, cradling her jaw with a gentleness that made her chest ache. The stillness between them didn't just deepen, it broke open, and what rushed in to fill it was warmth and recognition and the absolute certainty that every sleepless night and frozen corridor and cutting word from Stanton had been the path to this room, this fire, this mouth against hers. She kissed him back, with 12 nights of restraint finally released, and he made a sound against her lips that was quiet and broken and grateful, and his arms came around her and he held her the way he held everything, carefully, deliberately, with the full weight of his attention. When they finally pulled apart, his breathing was ragged and her hands were still gripping his shirt, and the fire had burned down to coals. He rested his forehead against hers. His thumbs traced slow circles on her jaw. "I haven't slept in 3 years," he murmured. "Not properly, not the whole night through. I know. I think I could sleep tonight." Angela's chest tightened. She brought her hands up from his shirt to the sides of his face, mirroring the way he held hers. "Then sleep," she said. "Stay," he said. "My shift isn't over. Angela." He pressed his lips to her temple, and the stillness around them hummed with something that felt like an entire fortress breathing out. "Stay." She stayed. He slept. For the first time in 3 years, the Alpha King of Cordale slept through the night without pacing, without waking, without searching for something that stood just out of reach. Angela sat in the chair by the fire with a fur pulled across her knees, watching the slow rise and fall of his breathing, and she thought about doors. all the doors that had closed behind her. The door of the house on the eastern ridge, the door of the magistrate's office, the door of every room she'd entered as someone lesser, someone stripped, someone who had to earn the right to stand where others stood by birth. And this door, the one she'd guarded, the one she'd crossed, this one, she'd opened herself. 3 months later, Angela stood in the corridor outside the king's bedchamber door, not guarding it. The post had been reassigned weeks ago, given to a steady young guard who reported that the East Corridor was the quietest watch in the fortress and couldn't understand why anyone had ever complained about it. She was leaning against the wall, arms crossed over a new tunic, deep blue wool with bronze clasps that she'd protested and he'd insisted on. Her braid was loose, half undone, the way it always ended up by evening. The fortress had changed in small ways. Stanton was gone, reassigned to a border garrison after the council inquiry revealed a pattern of targeted harassment extending far beyond Angela. Piers had been promoted to captain in his place, and the first thing he'd done was reorganize the watch rotation to eliminate the punitive assignments Stanton had used as weapons. He'd found Angela in the corridor the day of his appointment and given her a single nod, the kind that said everything without saying anything at all. Angela's title had changed too, though she still wasn't sure what to call it. She was part of the king's household now, not as a guard, but as something the court didn't have a neat word for: advisor, confidant. The one person who could tell the Alpha King he was wrong and have him actually listen. The door opened. Chet stood in the frame, his long coat off, his circlet off, his hair disordered. He looked tired. Good tired. The kind of tired that comes from a long day spent doing something that matters. He saw her, and the corner of his mouth lifted. "You're standing outside my door again." "Old habits." "You could come in." Angela looked at him. The amber eyes. The open door. The warmth of the fire behind him and the quiet that lived in the space between them. That gentle, enormous stillness that had nothing to do with the fortress and everything to do with the fact that when she was near him, every restless thing in the world went calm. She pushed off the wall and walked toward him. "Say it properly," she said. He caught her hand as she reached the threshold, drew her close, pressed his mouth to her ear. "Come inside," he whispered. She stepped through the door. He closed it behind her. His arms came around her waist, and she leaned into him, and the fire was warm, and the mountains were quiet, and the king who used to pace all night was still. The corridor went still too. But this time, it was a different kind of stillness. Not searching, not waiting, just peace, settled deep into the stone, as though the fortress itself had finally found what it had been holding its breath for. And behind the door, no one paced.